Hello and welcome to the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast. I'm Ralph Russo, the college football writer with the Associated Press. The most anticipated regular season game of the season is this week in the Southeastern Conference. Number 3 Georgia goes to number 2 Alabama in a matchup of the Bulldogs' smothering defense and Alabama's outrageously good offense. It should be loads of fun to break down that matchup and bounce around the country. We welcome Richard Johnson from the SEC Network to the show. RJ is part of a new show with Spencer Hall and former Georgia receiver and defensive back Brandon Boykin called Thinking Out Loud. We'll talk about the SEC's offensive spike, an intriguing weekend for the American Athletic Conference, and what's next for the ACC and the non-Clemson contenders after the Tigers put down what we thought was a pretty good Miami team. Last thing I'll throw in there, we had some breaking news right as the show was about to start. We'll touch base and talk a little bit about Florida pausing activities. By the time you listen to this, it may be more than a pause, but pausing football activities because of COVID-related issues. Thanks for listening to the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast. You can find us on Westwood One Podcast, Apple Podcast, just about anywhere you like to get your podcast. Please subscribe. If you like what you hear, give us a good review and a good rating. It helps college football fans find us, and it helps us find more college football fans, and away we go. Joining me this week on the podcast is Richard Johnson from the SEC Network. RJ's on a great new show, Monday nights, I believe, 7 p.m., called Thinking Out Loud with Spencer Hall, who, if you're a big college football fan, you kind of know who Spencer is. RJ also does a great podcast called Split Zone Duo. He does a whole bunch of other things. He is a Renaissance man in today's media landscape, producing all kinds of content, and the first time coming on this podcast. And I'm very excited to have my fellow Brooklyn resident, Richard Johnson, on the podcast. Thanks for joining me, RJ.
Ralph, I didn't pay you near enough money to say all those nice things. I'm in a lot of places. I got a newsletter with the guys who I wrote a book with over the summer. You can pick that up, Sinful 7, but we're part of what we're calling the Moon Crew. I'm doing some ditties for the Washington Post on how to watch football smarter. So I'm doing a weekly series with them that we just got off the ground. Podcast, like you said, Split Zone Duo on TV, SEC Network. And I also am doing some NFL stuff and some NFL takes with Yahoo Canada, some NFL picks with Odds Checker US, excuse me. Wow, Freudian slip there. And some
we'll
scheme
get to
stuff
them in
on
a
Stadium with our friend Mike Felder.
Very cool. Again, a Renaissance man and a very talented guy who is really good with the X's and O's, but also understands the greater college sports at large. So I think one of the things that I like to consider a strength about me is I know a little bit of everything about college football, right? I can kind of do the wonky NCAA stuff, and I can kind of do a little X's and O's, and I can kind of do a little history, and I can kind of do a little bit of everything. A master of none, but have a lot of
Jack of all trades.
Jack of all trades, master of none. RJ's got a lot of those skills too, but he knows the X's and O's a lot better than I do. So we're going to get into the big game of the year, not just in the SEC, but really in all of college football, at least the regular season game of the year, which is Georgia and Alabama this weekend. But breaking news, because we can't just have fun. Because we cannot just, no, there is no way we can just have fun. Right before we started recording this, news from Florida. Football activities have been paused due to an uptick in positive COVID tests. The number of what the uptick is has not been reported yet, or it's kind of floating around, but I haven't been able to confirm it.
It's floating around. We won't report unsubstantiated things.
Yeah.
But the number is, from what I understand, the number is as low as 5 and could be more than that.
Yeah, it seems like the number is more than 1. Let's put it that way. Frankly, I think we've already know the pattern on this. Like, we pause and then we kind of do some contact tracing and then we don't play a game. I hope that's not the case, but I don't know. This certainly seems ominous that we're not going to see Florida LSU this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, like Missouri and Vanderbilt already pulled the plug, and they didn't even do the pause thing. They just said, we're not doing it. Vanderbilt came with, 56 players, I believe, to South Carolina, or against South Carolina last week, I should say. Mm-hmm. The threshold that you need to have to play is 53. They were just over that, was Vanderbilt. And then obviously it seems like it got considerably worse. And they will not play Missouri this week. And we don't know if Florida's going to play LSU this week. Like you said, doesn't look good. Doesn't look like they will at this point. It's Tuesday afternoon. The news literally just broke 20 minutes ago. So, yeah, it's not looking good. It's also not looking good the fact that Dan Mullen said what he said after the game. We said pack the swamp or whatever. It wasn't good in light of the fact that the crowd at Kyle Field wasn't failing to stop Spiller and the Texas A&M run game. And then it didn't sound good as far as a public health statement. The governor of Florida said what he said last week, but both Miami's college and pro teams said we're not doing more than what we're doing at Hard Rock Stadium. And then Dan called for the pack the swamp, and to Scott Strickland's credit and Kent Fuchs's credit, the president of the University of Florida, they said pretty quickly, we are not, expanding the crowd at the swamp. And then 2-3 days later, you have this going on. So it is not been a good look for the Florida football program over the last couple of days.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens here. There's a couple of things, because these schools are not being very transparent. It's been hard to get a gauge on, do you pause because you're trying to wrap your arms around a possible outbreak? Can you not play because you just don't meet the thresholds like Vanderbilt? And what is in between there? Because some would say that if you suddenly pop up a handful or more of positives, look at what the NFL did. And again, it's hard to speculate, and they're not being completely transparent. But if all of a sudden you pop up with a bunch of positives, to me, that suggests you're going to need a couple of days to sort this stuff out.
Yeah. And it's further compounded, I think, Ralph, by the fact that like Virginia Tech's been going into games down 20 players each week. And then I know all of those guys aren't COVID positive. I know some of them are just, contact trace quarantine guy. You're down 20 players. You're down 3 coaches. I mean, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, because it makes you wonder, why haven't you paused to get your arms around this thing? Or do you have it under control, and this is what under control looks like? And listen, I'm not an epidemiologist. I live with one, but I'm not one. So I don't know. I don't know the exact answer for yes, this is what it looks like to have your arms wrapped around it. You have X many positives. They are in isolation. You have a bunch of kids in quarantine after contact tracing. You have everything under control. Now you decide if you want to go play a football game. Again, with Florida, it looks like if this is just popping up now. The other thing I ask, the other thing I'll steer this to, and I'm interested in your opinion. Before the season, I had asked coaches, during an average week, if all of a sudden I take away X number of practices, and can you still play? What's the magic number on practices where if I took them away, but said, no, I'm going to clear you guys to play, but you can't have this X number of practices. How many could you lose before you start being worried? And you got different numbers of if it was 2 or 3 early in the week, that would be hard. What is your sense of let's say Florida tomorrow says, listen, we got it under control, but now we haven't practiced on Tuesday and Wednesday. Could you still play a game on Saturday?
I mean, you can, but I think Florida's got a couple things at play here. So let's talk about the practice week sort of as we know it. We know that Sunday, some teams take off Sunday if you win or what have you, but Sunday is what it is, sort of film review, et cetera. Monday's fairly light. The bulk of your work is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, walk through Friday, and teams rep different stuff and they do different stuff, but Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, those are the work days. So Florida's got Tuesday missed. Now B, we also sort of have to bring some of the football guy stuff in here when you talk about this issue, because So we're talking about Florida's defense, right? Florida's defense is terrible. It's the reason they lost on Saturday against Texas A&M. It's been a problem all season. If you were going to try to retool that defense in any meaningful way, and you are now missing one of your biggest work days and probably another one of your biggest work days, if we're still under the pretense that the game will happen on Saturday, which I think both of us probably think it's not going to, but let's pretend we're still under the pretense that the game is going to happen on Saturday. That is in a very different way not good for Florida. Beyond global pandemic, you may have quite a bit of players with the disease.
Right, and that's one of the things I've tried to stress to folks throughout, try of explaining like what the complications are. The complications are not only, hey, we're going to have a bunch of kids in quarantine for 14 days, or I'm not trying to minimize simply, oh, they have the virus. It's not good. You don't want the kids to, I know they don't get very sick, most of them, but you do not want people getting a virus that is only, less than a year old. Aside from that.
I've been talking about this with my friends and all this kind of stuff. Like, look, I'm 27. I'm pretty young. I'm in pretty good health, all that kind of stuff. I don't feel like going even under flu-like symptoms for 5 days. That doesn't sound fun to me. I have stuff to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And not to mention the fact that, again, we don't know where this leads in 3 or 4 or 5 years. If in 8 years from now, young and healthy, Richard Johnson is now in his mid-30s and all of a sudden he doesn't run as much as he would have liked to or whatever because oh boy, my lungs just don't take anyway. The point being that I don't want to completely dismiss the medical side of this, the health and safety side of this, but there is a practical side of this when it comes to playing football that this is part of the disruption. This is part of the disruption that teams were worried about because now it's not a matter of, yes, maybe you have, because we set that number, a bunch of, the SEC and a bunch of other conferences set that number. Florida may have enough players to play, but should they actually play? Right.
Right.
There's two questions there.
Right. And we've already seen, we've seen what Florida's like with some guys gone here or there, not playing inactive. Now let's talk about, we want to talk about Missouri and Vanderbilt. Those are not the most talented programs in the country. What happens when double digit of those players are not out? You want to talk about depth? You want to talk about lack thereof? You want to talk about maybe you're running out an offensive line that is not up to par, up to Power 5 par because you're running in backups or young guys or guys that don't know the system or guys that just transferred in or whatever you got to do to sort of, ramshackle a team together because of this. Then you're, and just to use that example of a patchwork offensive line, then you're putting your quarterback at risk for not COVID, for, taking a sack and God forbid, Dak Prescott situation happening. Yeah. So there's a lot of things that compound this.
And that's what I think for SEC football fan, if you're a Florida football fan, think of it sort of like this. Your season could be completely waylaid by this, even if you play the games, right? If you're Florida and you have enough players to play, so you sort of feel obligated to play this weekend, and then you get beat by LSU. And again, God forbid you get a player or two hurt or something goes awry in that. This game, what if you have to play LSU, you lose to LSU, and that ends up sort of being the deciding factor on why you don't win the SEC East, right?
Right. And it's what did we even do here, right? We ran them out there without as much depth or whatever. And then they go out, they lose. And so exactly. So what did we even do here? What was the point?
Yeah, I think the overall thing I keep worrying about as we continue on this season. And so far, it hasn't been, they haven't lost that many games, is at what point do we get some type of disruption that could possibly sort of delegitimize the season? Tom Herman's probably not the best guy to quote here, but early before the season, because of the way his team has gone, it doesn't look like he's playing for championships. But I had asked him before the season, so what's the minimum you would be able to sort of get a team ready to play and feel okay, we're going to play this game even though we're not really maybe in our best self? And he sort of stopped me and was like, listen, we have to decide whether we're playing games just to play them or we're playing games to actually win them and compete for championships. And there is still a possibility here with COVID, trying to play through COVID, where teams are just sort of playing games, but not necessarily playing games that are geared towards winning them and competing for championships. It's a long-winded way of ramping up to, hey, let's talk about the game of the year in Georgia and Alabama. Right?
Yeah, there is no segue. Let's just move on to it.
Yeah. So listen, as of right now, that game is still on, and I think it should be a really great one. So let's start with this. My biggest concern about Georgia is not necessarily on the defensive side, but we'll get into that at some point. My biggest concern about Georgia is, can they run with Alabama? Can that offense keep up with Alabama? Because I don't think in today's day and age you get 21-14. Like that just is out the window. It's been so for a few years. Elite offenses rule the day. Alabama's got the elitist of offenses. But Georgia hasn't shown that type of explosiveness and big playability. Can they if they have to?
If Georgia gets down 2 scores, I think this game is probably over. I don't know. Absent a Mac Jones turnover or whatever, which very much in the realm of possibility given the way Georgia's defense has played. I think there's sort of, if we go around, if we take the sort of 4 possible outcomes, right, which is Alabama blowing them out, Alabama winning close, Georgia winning close, or Georgia blowing them out. I don't think Georgia blows Alabama out in any sort of permutation that you play this game, short of, Mac Jones throwing 6 picks. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's going to happen. I think if Georgia wins, Georgia will win a close football game. Okay. As far as Alabama can win this game by 5. They can win this game by 40. I think Alabama's got more ways to win this game than Georgia does. And I think that it's a little low hanging fruit, but I think about the quarterbacks in this game. What happens when both of these quarterbacks get affected? Mac Jones has only been under pressure for 12 of 75 dropbacks, 12 of 75. And that's absent whether you're blitzing or not. Nobody's getting home against Alabama. Stetson Bennett, Tennessee did bring some pressure. And when that happened on Saturday, Stetson Bennett's in those limited snaps, 11 of his 29 dropbacks, Tennessee blitzed. Stetson Bennett's completion percentage did drop. He was affected. They forced him to process quicker. There are some limitations to Stetson Bennett's game when we talk about throwing deep, throwing outside the numbers. I get those guys are open, but when he throws the deep ball, it gets underthrown. He's underthrowing really, really fast guys, which Mac Jones does not do. Stetson Bennett is really, really good at throwing over the middle of the field on time into tight windows. It's honestly pretty wild. He's really, really good at that, and Georgia has been good at getting him in those scenarios and those situations. Ole Miss attacked Alabama that way on Saturday. So I'm not saying there's no way in here for Georgia's offense, because there definitely is. And again, if Georgia's going to protect like they're protecting up front with that offensive line, Ralph, me or you could be standing where Stetson Bennett is on Saturday and get some completions. I mean, they have kept him clean a lot this season. But if this gets track meaty and Alabama gets out into some sort of lead here, 10, 14 points, and Stetson Bennett has to press, Georgia has not had to really press at any point this season. Now, the Arkansas game was hairy through 2 quarters, but that's not pressing. You're still way better than that team. Pressing against this Alabama team, I don't know if Georgia can pull that off.
So I'll be that guy on Twitter, but Alabama's defense is terrible, right? We just saw them get waylaid by Ole Miss. Now, let me just frame the question this way. That's one thing, but like, can Georgia do any of the things that Ole Miss did? I guess is the question. Exactly.
That's what I'm talking about. Like, Alabama's defense was bad against Ole Miss. It was, I honestly think the blueprint for Georgia is sort of trying to perfect what Texas A&M did to Alabama. Now, again, Texas A&M stole 14 points in that game. It should have been way worse than it was. But Georgia's not going to do, to your point, Georgia is not going to do all of the things, particularly the tempo stuff, that Ole Miss was able to do against Alabama. When Ole Miss does those things against Alabama, when you run tempo, you only run tempo, not only, but the biggest boost to an offense when you run tempo is not that the defense is tired. It's that the defense is basic. It's that the defense can't do a ton of stuff. It's that the defense can't sub anybody out. That's really like the value add of tempo. Georgia doesn't really do that. Georgia wants a methodical approach. Georgia wants to eat up a much clock. I would love Jalen Waddle on the sideline if I'm Georgia. And I know Georgia's defense is so good. It's so fresh. It's so deep. We'll get to them. Get to that side of the ball. But it's still a pretty decent defense to keep Jalen Waddle on the sideline. That is a good defensive strategy. Play offense in a methodical way. Sometimes a good defense is a methodical, plodding offense if you can pull it off. Georgia is the best at the country at playing a very specific brand of football. To their credit, do not want to take anything away from them. But where Alabama has seemed the most vulnerable this season, in my mind, is on the back end. But if Georgia's going to do this, so many guys in the box and force Alabama to sort of throw it back to 2013, I imagine Nick Saban is pretty fond of that idea about how to scheme it up on Saturday.
That's what I was sort of thinking too. Like if I'm Nick Saban and poor Pete Golding, who must have had a rough couple of meetings.
I tell you, I bet Sunday was not happy for him.
Let me tell you, Alabama fans, no matter what you posted on social media about Pete Golding, I'm sure was not anywhere near as bad as what he got in his own room. But again, I got to imagine that they were just like happy to see Lane go, right? They just must have been thrilled to see, okay, we're done with that. We're going to go back to playing a little bit more of retro ball here. Though that's probably being a bit too cruel to, I don't know if cruel is the right word, but whatever. I'm probably being a bit too critical of Georgia to say that their offense is from 1999. They're not that antiquated, but it's definitely a smaller phone booth. It's definitely a smaller space kind of offense. And I think that Alabama is still ultimately well prepared to deal with that.
Yeah. And the thing is, so, okay, you want to track me with Alabama? How's this, Ralph? Our buddy Roger Sherman on Twitter said Alabama scored gained 723 of 764 possible yards on Saturday. They gained quite literally every single yard just about that they could gain against that Ole Miss team. So you want to play basketball on grass? All right, Alabama can still do that better than you can.
So then let's talk about Georgia's defense, because Georgia's defense is the best in the country. It so far is allowing about I think only Georgia and Houston are allowing less than 4 yards per play, and Houston's only played one game. The interesting to me about thing to me about Georgia's defense is, as great as the talent is, and listen, there's nothing but 4s and 5 stars on that. They're still, I think, better than the sum of their parts, because there is not one player on Georgia's defense. I don't think. Maybe Monty Rice becomes this. I don't think there's one player on Georgia's defense that's as good as, let's say, Roquan Smith is or was. I don't think they have the one or two really elite stars. They have a lot of very good players who will be playing in the NFL, but I don't know if there's one guy in there who's a top 15 draft pick. So how does Georgia be, first of all, what is Georgia doing so well? And secondly, how does Georgia become the better than the sum of the parts, even when the parts are really good?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with Georgia is how they use sort of the sums of their parts, right? I think what people aren't factoring in about Georgia is how fresh they stay. So on Saturday, Georgia faced 64 defensive snaps against Tennessee, right? Only 3 Georgia players played more than 40 of those snaps, all 3 of them DBs, which means this. It means that Georgia has enough guys that they feel comfortable rotating in, which means that there are enough guys who grasp Kirby's tough to grasp defense, heady to grasp defense. Kirby's so comfortable rolling those guys in that they stay fresh over the balance of the game. Now, against Tennessee, you really see it because it's only 60 snaps. Against Alabama, that's where it may really, benefit Georgia, because Alabama may run that play count up to 70 or 80, maybe even 90 if things really get hairy in this game. So you like to have all that depth. But they're just really good, and they're really good up front. I mean, it really does start on up front with their ability to stay on schedule. Georgia has held 19 of 24 drive opening rushing attempts by opponents to 3 yards or less. Yeah. From the outset, from the first snap of your drive, you are behind the chains, right? You're not on schedule. And when you're not on schedule, Georgia can come after you judiciously. All 3 of those turnovers that Jarrett Garantano had on Saturday were all on back-breaking third downs. And third down, what people don't realize is third down is a game within itself. Mm-hmm. You really see it in the NFL, but in college too. Third down is a game in and of itself. There are things that teams do on third downs that they do not do in other downs, particularly 3rd and 5 plus, when Georgia can really, really get after you. So maybe there aren't a ton of stars on this defense besides maybe Richard LeCounte, or maybe it's a thing of these guys will get drafted and you'll see it in 3 or 4 years how really good they really and truly are. But I mean, Georgia, they are deep and they are talented, and it is really quite stunning the way they have been able to play football to date like this. I mean, it is complementary football in really all 3 phases of the game, but it's complementary football it's like what you want out of a professional football team, right? You want a professional team that doesn't ever beat itself. The defense helps the offense, which I know is something that we barely ever see these days, like you said earlier, because offenses are so good. But I mean, it seems like by the time we got to the second half for Tennessee, it was like Tennessee with everything they had to get a first down. I mean, everybody is just struggling to gain some semblance of yards on these guys. It's crazy to see.
So what I'm most interested then, and what I think is really the crux of this game on Saturday, it's more than just Alabama, Georgia. It's sort of, is there a defense left in college football? Is there a team left? Yeah, because if this defense can't stop Alabama, then we're done with defense. And let me lead into this part of the conversation, because we were going to talk about this offensive revolution going on in the SEC, which really has been going on for years, though maybe I think with Lane and Leach coming in, it's taken it to a slightly different level as far as the emphasis on the pass game. But let me start it with this. Is Kirby Smart? I think he was going for more of this offense, right? If with bringing Monken in, getting Jamie Newman as a transfer, were they? Do you think that they were heading in this direction, but then it all fell apart because of a pandemic and Jamie Newman opts out? Is Georgia remiss in not having this type of offense, or is it? Listen, they just weren't able to implement it in this crazy season?
Yeah, Kirby Smart's not dumb. I mean, Kirby Smart was around. He watched what Alabama did with Blake Sims, right? He watched what Alabama did with Jacob Coker. He watched how Alabama modernized quite quickly, Alabama modernized. And again, if Georgia spent every day of the last 9 months building this program around what they thought they were getting in Jamie Newman or an otherwise mobile quarterback, right? It is to Kirby Smart's credit that in a fire drill situation where Jamie Newman opts out, and I don't know if you have intel on this, but as far as I understand, that did take everybody by surprise. Mm-hmm. But when Jamie Newman opts out and you got a fire drill situation, for them to essentially roll the ball back in 2-3 weeks and switch up what it is that they want to do. Now, again, they're not running single wing, whatever from 1970 with Darrell Royal or whatever. It's not that, retrograde. They are doing a lot of I formation stuff. They are doing a lot of stuff to scheme around Stetson Bennett's deficiencies. Yes. Again, that's complementary football. That's good coaching. They do some stuff that is futuristic, whatever you want to call it, modernistic, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, it is to Kirby Smart's credit that they were able to sort of rejigger the whole boat and still look this competent. Because again, and I do not say this to take it away from Georgia, I don't think there's anybody that can play this brand of football this well.
So I want to give you this to chew on. Paul Meyerberg, who is a friend of mine and a friend of yours. You know Paul, right?
Yeah.
You guys go way back. You're another Brooklyn resident. So after the LSU championship game last year when we saw what may have been the greatest offense, and certainly statistically the greatest offense in the history of college football. One of the things Paul mentioned was, he's like, I think what we're seeing now, he's like, I don't know if this will become an outlier. Maybe to a certain degree, 60 touchdown passes. But what his point was, we are now seeing the marriage of the offensive innovation and the SEC talent. It's been happening, but now this is what it looks like. What it looks like at its peak is what LSU just did. And I don't think, and what his point was, I don't think that's going away. I think we're going to see more of this. We might not see it exactly to the point of what LSU is doing, but the fact of the matter is, Alabama may be on its way to an offensive season like that.
If Alabama's defense gets a pulse, now we'll see what happens with Florida, but let's pretend that everything was okay with Florida for 2 seconds. If Florida's defense had a pulse, right, you would be seeing both of those teams in sort of the beginning of the LSU conversation, right? These offenses, I mean, Alabama's offense they are operating at a clip right now that is quite stunning. And obviously they needed every bit of that on Saturday against Ole Miss. I think the conversation about defense globally, how we think about defense as football fans, no matter what conference, has to change. And I know SEC fans were going to be the sort of the last ones out, and maybe it's our Michigan friends that and some of those in the Big Ten that really may be the last one off the boat here. But guys, the way we think about defense has to change. There's no shutouts. There's none, and that is why what Georgia is doing is so noteworthy across the board. It's not about shutting out. It's about getting stops. Just get some stops, right? If we're talking about a 12, 13 possession game, if you can get me 6 stops, if you can get me 8 stops in a 13 possession game, true stops where you're getting that team to punt, you feel good about the fact that you think on the flip side, you can score on 6 to 7 of your possessions if you're a good offense, and if you're elite, like Alabama or what have you. We're talking about scoring on 9 possessions, that sort of stuff. So it's thinking about the game and rejiggering how we think about the game. That is really what this offensive revolution is really about. Because I agree, I don't think we're rolling back anytime soon, particularly if they don't change the clock rules in college football, because the games are long, really, really long. And, if the clock rules don't change, if some of the rules around, pass interference and hand checking and all that sort of stuff, if that stuff doesn't change, I don't know what's going to happen to roll the ball back, so to speak.
Yeah, I think we've gone from the golden age of quarterbacks now to the golden age of receivers. I wrote about this a little bit last year during the leading up to the national championship game, because you look at LSU's guys and you look at Clemson's guys and be like, wow, like, holy cow, look at these receivers. And then you realize, oh, everybody's got one like this, or at least everybody who's an elite team has at least one like this too. And I think it's just a byproduct of, again, all those 7-on-7, for a while it was creating this great, it was manufacturing and spitting out all these great quarterbacks. And now, of course, the next thing is for it to manufacture and spit out all these great wide receivers, especially a lot of them who thought that they were going to be small forwards or wings in basketball. And they decide, you know what? I can catch a bunch of touchdowns. That's a pretty cool thing to do too, other than dunk. So I'll go and play that sport. So yeah, I think we're moving into this. It's just one thing after another that has landed on the side of the offense in football in general, but especially in college football. And I as you said, I think you wave the white flag if you're a defensive team and just decide like we have to reframe what we think defense is.
Yeah, and I do think that there is something to be said for the fact that nobody can tackle. I mean, the most I know a lot of people just watch college football, and God bless you, because I used to be one of you. But when you watch the NFL, watch an NFL game, watch a NFL half, the way those dudes tackle on Sundays is night and day from what the tackling is like in college football right now. And I don't know if it's a COVID offseason thing or what, but there's not a lot of good tackling going on in college football right now, particularly compared to the NFL. And that, to me, is sort of the starkest difference between the two games right now. Because, look, the high school, college, and pro game, and Ralph, I know you've been around a long time. Like, I don't think it's ever – I'm young, but I don't think the game has ever been so sort of – I don't think there's ever been so much schematic synergy across all three levels, right? And I don't think, quarterbacks come to college readier for the pro game than they did 15 years ago. But the pro game is also readier for college quarterbacks and to receive what they actually do well, right? Justin Herbert is running the daggum option for the Chargers in the NFL. It took Mario Cristobal 10 games to do that last year with Auburn. But they were 10 years ago, Justin Herbert was not running the option in the NFL, right? They were not going to put him in that situation, particularly now that it sort of seems like he may have some franchise quarterback written on him. So, the game has changed. The NFL is finally over the last 5 or 6 years gotten to a point where, okay, we will now sort of mold our league, at least on offense. We will now mold our league to accept the talent and build our schemes around the talent more than trying to retrofit these guys into NFL ball, so to speak.
Okay, so let me take a quick break here on the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast, talking with Richard Johnson from the SEC Network and many other places. Author, man about town, television star. We're going to come back after this and steer away from the SEC and head towards maybe the AAC, maybe the ACC, and we got to talk a little BYU. We'll be back right after this on the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast. We're back on the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast. I am joined today by Richard Johnson from the SEC Network. You can find him on Thinking Out Loud. Is it every Monday or every how many? Is it? It's not just Monday though, or is it just Monday?
Apparently, I'm told that it reruns quite often.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, you can do it once, and then it's always, of course, evergreen and fresh. Who else is on that show with you?
I'm on with Alyssa Lang, who is sort of our host, our point guard extraordinaire. She's incredibly talented. Brandon Boykin, former Georgia Bulldog. He played corner for the Dogs. He also played in the NFL for a little bit, played with the Eagles. And Spencer Hall, who, like me, co-wrote a book with Spencer, worked with Spencer for a long time. Spencer is one of the OG sort of college football bloggers out there. So we have a lot of fun, and it's really great to we all sort of grow into the show. I keep telling people we work with really, really talented producers because at the end of the day, man, this thing's a Zoom call and it's a highly produced Zoom call. It looks really cool. It's got a lot of bells and whistles, but it is still a Zoom call. So for our production staff and the way that they're able to add the bells and whistles and the window dressing and make us look and sound good, work with a lot of talented people. It's been a lot of fun.
So is this your first deep foray into television?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
I started school. I went to the University of Florida and started thinking I was going to be on TV, actually. And then I started doing sort of those 2-minute stand-up news sports hits. And I was like, I don't really like this. So I started writing, but I still sort of had the TV pedigree, so to speak. My degree is actually in broadcast journalism, funny enough.
Mine is too, RJ.
Yeah.
Mine is too.
But it all comes full circle. And so I still have the skills and can still ball on TV. So you turn the camera on and I'm ready to go.
I asked that question though because I also realized that I've just done so very little bit of television, but especially with someone like Alyssa Lang is your host, right? Is the person who quarterbacks your show. Yeah. When you are around professional TV people, it becomes as I have at times, it is amazing how when you see that job done well. And you really appreciate the skill of doing it, of talking into a camera and not being flushed. Because it's one thing to be teed up to talk, which is generally the role that you are in now and other people like us get into. But the people who are really TV people, it's amazing what they are able to do and how skillfully and smoothly they're able to do it. So I'm just, I just throw that out there as like, I just wonder, like, as you were saying, like all the skill that's around you to make this thing look good. Like unless you're in TV, unless you get like, when you get a little behind the curtain of TV, it's amazing how much talent there is to make that thing look good.
Yeah, it's also like for me, somebody who, there's a lot of all sort of the ancillary factors, right? Like in a normal year, I would have flown to the SEC Network's studio in Charlotte, and we would have auditioned, and we would have done a rehearsal show, and we would have done, we would be in studio together, all this sort of stuff. But we're not. And so so much credit given to all of the staff at SEC Networks for sort of making sure all the ancillary factors are to the extent they can be controlled and neutral, so that we can sort of be comfortable and just sit down in the chair and do what it is we do best, which is talk about football.
So the Alabama-Georgia game is the marquee event of the weekend, and the rest of the weekend, listen, you're like me. You will find nuggets and morsels, and you will eat up every bit of the college football schedule, no matter how deep into it you get. But I think for the average fan, you might look at it and say Alabama, Georgia, and not a whole lot else. But we're here now to provide you of some of that, like why some of that other stuff is really good. What has jumped out to me this week is BYU's been really good, and we're going to get to see them play what I think, even though we've only seen Houston play once, is another really good team. So before I get your thoughts on the game in general, I want to ask about like BYU and what they're doing and why it's been so good. And even though they haven't played what we consider sort of like the name brand, really high level competition, why should we still be impressed with what BYU is doing?
Well, I think Kalani Sitake deserves a ton of credit for sort of opening this thing up, right? He's a guy who I joked about this last year. It was like BYU wants to play the whole game between the numbers, right? No space, none of that. But with this quarterback that they've got, Zach Wilson, and I've been joking about him for almost a year and a half now, calling him the Mormon Manziel because of the way he plays. I mean, this dude is really, really good. Now he got hurt last year, right? And so I think they're sort of a year behind schedule because he got hurt early in the season last year and missed so much time. But he is now back now. And look, they're still coming downhill at your behind with that team, but they're also doing some air raid stuff. And I think when they do that, you really see how talented Zach Wilson is. Zach Wilson has a deep ball, truly, and I mean this, that finishes about as well as any other quarterback in the country, to be honest with you. That guy can absolutely wing the pig. The way he generates velocity on his throws, and again, listen to what I'm saying here, folks, before we, take this out of context. But the way he generates power is similar to that of Aaron Rodgers and similar to that of Kyler Murray on his deep balls. It's almost like when he really spins the ball, he's almost on one foot when he throws the ball, when it comes out of his hand, because he is putting so much rotational force into that throw. He is really talented. They're really fun. They're really good too. They had a little fight with UTSA last week. Not literally. I mean, they were sort of got dragged down in the mud in that game. Shout out Lowell Narcisse, former LSU enrollee, who is at quarterback at UTSA now and has them sort of humming a little bit under Jeff Traylor. But UTSA gave them all they wanted on Saturday, to the credit of the Roadrunners. And they are going to get a handful with this Houston team. I think that earlier in the season, this is probably 2 weeks ago, before they added Boise and added San Diego State, it didn't look like they would be less than like a touchdown favorite against anybody. Obviously, Houston played really well on Thursday against Tulane. But now they've got Boise on the schedule. Now they've got San Diego State. It looked previously that they would run the table quite comfortably. Now with Boise State, that's going to be a big game in early November. And San Diego State, don't sleep on them in December as well, if we're talking about BYU getting an at-large bid to the New Year's Six or whatever, the January 15th Six. I don't even know when they're going to do it this year. But I say that to say I think BYU is a pretty good football team. And if you're up, I don't know what time that Houston game is.
Well, it's in Houston, so I think it's a 9 p.m. kick.
9 p.m. Okay.
Yeah,
so
Eastern.
if you're up late and you want to watch something pretty fun on the second screen while you're watching Alabama and Georgia, or if that game really gets out of hand quickly, flip it over and watch BYU because they are really fun.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Friday night. It's a Friday night game. So
it's Friday night.
Yeah,
okay.
so it's perfect window. 9 p.m. Friday night. You got nothing else better to do on 9 p.m. on a Friday night but watch Houston and BYU. And so I take that to sort of look at I think the AAC, the American, is the most interesting conference this week. If you look at the conference slate, Big 12 has hardly anybody playing, including a game that got canceled. The ACC, nothing really great there as far as matchups. But the AAC's got some pretty good matchups. First of all, the Houston BYU thing, which is interesting, even though it's not a conference game, but the AAC lost a lot of its cred games, right? It's not going to get a chance to play a bunch of P5 teams that it normally would. So if the AAC is trying to sort of like lift itself up a little bit, this game will help, right? If Houston can come out there and do some things against BYU, that sort of is a credibility game for the AAC in general. You also have SMU going to Tulane. Tulane has been sort of a choose your own adventure team. Like they blow big leads, they come from behind. Like it's just, they've been a little manic. But SMU, even though they're playing without maybe one of their best receivers, Reggie Roberson, moving forward.
That's so tough.
Yeah, but
so tough.
Super explosive. On Saturday, UCF Memphis. Neither team is ranked, but I bet you by the end of the season, at least one of them will be. And also over at in Tulsa, they get a tricky little Tulsa team with a pretty good defense going against Cincinnati. So that's sort of the slate from the AAC. Which one of that, or I may have you talk about all of them, but which one of them is most interesting to you?
I want to see if Tulsa's for real. I mean, look, they should have been blown out by UCF. UCF was not able to step on them the way that UCF should have been able to, given the game state. I mean, the amount of turnovers, all that sort of stuff. So if UCF and Memphis is another classic, we're sort of back on with both those teams. Thank God he didn't bring up USF, because USF might legitimately be one of the worst teams in the country.
Yeah, and when you can't score on ECU, and they couldn't really score much on ECU, there is some serious issues at USF.
Yeah, that is going to be some sort of rebuild down in Tampa. But they play Temple. Temple got Navy week 1, right? For their first game. I shouldn't say week 1, but for their first game last week. Temple gets Navy. And so, okay, you have to play the triple option. And the thing is, I can't figure out for the life of me how good Navy is. So, right, Navy gets absolutely flambéed by BYU. And then they come back and they come from nowhere,
way behind,
and beat Tulane, right? And then they get the pants beat off of them by Air Force. So it's like, what actually is Navy right now? I don't think Navy is very good, but I don't know. And then again, I don't know if we're going to see, because I don't think ECU is very good. Navy plays ECU on Saturday. So there's a lot of sort of intrigue in the AAC. I wonder, does the AAC need an undefeated team? Because Cincinnati is playing this Tulsa team that we think is kind of scrappy here, right? We think both of us, I think, are in accord about what we think about Luke Fickell. The Cincinnati team was pretty good last year, was pretty good the year before that, but ran into the UCF buzzsaw, and the floor drops out of it. So does Cincinnati take care of business against Tulsa, or is Tulsa actually for real? I am, again, intrigued by the AAC this season.
Yeah, and especially with Cincinnati, they're not. We talk about how Georgia is sort of playing a different style of ball from the way that the rest of the SEC is trending. Well, the AAC is mostly a fast and furious kind of league, or they're playing some option stuff, right? Because Tulane, but then there's Cincinnati, which is Luke Fickell is from the Jim Tressel, Mark D'Antonio tree, right? He is playing that type of ball. He is retro. He wants to play that.
There's not enough tight ends for him.
Yeah, he wants to play that type of ball. And I think what makes that interesting to me, they're very good at it, and they can be very good at it, but they do play with it does create like some slimmer margins. And I know on the road they always kind of seem to find themselves in a position where they're looking for a play on the road to beat another team. So that's why I'm interested to see how things go with Tulsa, because even when Cincinnati has been good over the last couple of years, I find myself watching them, especially on the road, going like, oh, we're doing this again. We're doing this like, okay, we need a field goal. We need one more possession. So my guess is that's what you'll see out of Tulsa and Cincinnati this week. Because Tulsa, again, like we see Philip Montgomery and think, oh, Baylor offense, but really it's been Tulsa's defense that has been scrappy.
Yeah, I mean, they are not a pushover. I mean, they just aren't. Again, they beat that UCF team. It was a weird game. They beat that UCF team. I mean, they gave Oklahoma State everything they could handle.
Exactly. Now, and mostly because of their defense.
Right. It took everything Tulsa had in them to score 7 points in that game, which is a problem moving forward. But again, if you sort of throw up on yourself a little bit, you're going to run into some problems against Tulsa. Not exactly a pushover here. Okay,
let me cap it off with this, and then I'll let you go back to your life. Your very exciting, multi-talented life. The ACC. I'm going to look backwards a little bit because there's nothing that interesting on this game. There's a couple of things. I'm interested to see where BC goes this week as far as playing Virginia Tech. I think that's a kind of an interesting game. But generally speaking, I want to look backwards a little bit because Miami did not do well against Clemson.
No, sir, they did not.
We found out that is still not a fair fight. And it made me wonder because I thought to myself, boy, like before that game, if Clemson comes back to the pack just a little tiny bit, Miami looks pretty good. Obviously, Notre Dame is squatting in the ACC this year, so that's a team that might have something interesting for Clemson. I definitely love North Carolina's skill players. If Virginia Tech could ever get everybody on the field, there might be something pretty good there. So I kind of convinced myself, like a lot of people, we kind of convinced ourselves that Pitt could be good, even though that is kind of fading away. I thought to myself, boy, like there might be a path here where Clemson, not that they won't win it, but really has to work to win the ACC this year. And then I see them just take apart Miami and think, well, guess not. So, RJ, man, try to convince me a little bit that some of these other possible landmines could be places where Clemson has to actually break a sweat to get through the ACC this year.
I legitimately think Notre Dame, they better come with their big boy pants, get Notre Dame. Okay. I think Notre Dame can get them legitimately. I think that spread will probably be within a touchdown.
And that's in South Bend in November.
Yeah, that is in South Bend in November. Maybe kind of chilly depending on the weather situation. Clemson may not be able to be fully operational on offense. We'll see. We know it can get sort of squirrely up in Indiana at that point in time. For me, Clemson is – so I thought Clemson was still in the boot-up phase, right? You know how Clemson, September and October, they sort of kind of play with their food, right? Last year against North Carolina – playing with their food, not fully operational yet. Clemson does not, and this is to Dabo's credit, Clemson does not make many bones about the fact that they want to be at their best in December and January. I mean, it's actually pretty cool that they actually say that because a lot of programs pretend that that's not how they operate, be that as it may. So I thought Saturday that, okay, Clemson's still in the boot-up phase. Miami may be able to get at them a little bit. Clemson will win, but maybe Miami could cover, right? That was not the case, clearly. I mean, Clemson, that game should have been worse. I mean, they controlled it from snap number one. I mean, they dared D'Eriq King to beat them, couldn't do it. Mm-hmm. Clemson, I guess, plucky upstart Clemson finally has 2 shutdown corners, I think, for Brent Venables. I can't imagine when the last time they've had that. And Brent Venables really needs it, right?
They may have more than that. They may have 3.
God, it's
yeah. I mean,
so talented.
Sheridan is really good, and Booth is really good, and obviously Kendricks is great. So I mean, and they may have more than they may have like 3 who can really shut it down.
I think the only way you can beat these guys really is if you can somehow, again, easier said than done, and it's not even really easy said, if you can somehow take away Travis Etienne, because the way Travis Etienne makes plays after the catch, the way he turns screens into touchdowns, right? If you can somehow make that Clemson offense play with like one hand behind their back, that is potentially a way you can limit the amount of points you can. We talk about breaking serve, we talk about getting stops. If you can keep that guy contained, you may be able to limit the damage on offense. But I think Notre Dame is going to come out and say, I don't know if you trust Ian Book. If Ian Book throws 45 balls against Clemson, I think they're going to lose.
Well, I think if he throws 35, they might lose.
I do think that, because I think Clemson's defense, honestly, is pretty light this year. And I mean, like, weight-wise. Like, I mean that you can maybe make some hay against them up front, particularly Notre Dame, because I think Notre Dame has one of the better offensive lines in the country, particularly on the left side there. So I think Notre Dame could run on Clemson. And I'm trying to find anything.
No, I hear you.
Anything here. You know what I mean?
I kind of keep thinking that maybe North Carolina with that. So
just because they don't care.
Well,
damn the torpedoes.
Yeah, I mean, my assessment on North Carolina is, I know people will easily jump at me on this. If you just take this grouping of 5 players, the quarterback, the 2 top receivers, the 2 top running backs, that grouping on North Carolina, and I say, okay, take that grouping of players and match it to the same grouping, quarterback, 2 top receivers, 2 top running backs on any team in the country. Now, listen, again, if you're Clemson, if you're Alabama, maybe you can roll out some guys and say, no, we're good. We're just as good. But very few teams are going to be able to match that group of 5 that North Carolina has at those positions. So maybe they can do some things where they get, again, sort of a damn the torpedo. Now, I don't know if they can block Clemson well enough, especially when we talk about fully operational, especially once those freshman defensive linemen really get it, defensive linemen really get it rolling. So that could be an issue. But I do think maybe North Carolina can do some things to just get into a bit of a run up and down against Clemson and hopefully, get a couple of turnovers and have the ball at last. But I like your idea of maybe that Notre Dame offensive line doing some work.
Yeah, I actually see North Carolina, when they run the ball, they're actually not really playing all that well up front, which sort of worries me. Those guys, those running backs you talk about, I mean, they're really sort of making chicken salad out of chicken, you know what. Mm-hmm. And to their credit, very talented players, good vision, good footwork. But as we know, Clemson's a whole nother animal. Sam Howell, great deep ball. The way that they're able to sort of go over the top, they finally sort of showed it against Virginia Tech. Given Virginia Tech, I know, was threadbare on the secondary because it's a Virginia Tech game, unfortunately. So, but, North Carolina attacked and they went after them. That's similar to what Ole Miss did against Alabama. I think if you're going to go down, if you're North Carolina, you're going to go down on the shield, man. Just go after them.
The one thing that'll be interesting to me about Clemson, I think the last piece of the puzzle that makes, when we talk about fully operational, especially on the offensive side, if they can get one of those 5 big 5-star receivers to start really playing like T. Higgins, whether it's Ladson or Ngata, or I think the freshman's name is Williams, they can get one of those guys to become T. Higgins, then they become, then they're Death Star, right? I mean, then they are truly, at the fullness of Clemson, because I don't think they have that. I think that's one of the reasons why they're going to ETN so much in the passing game, is because those receivers, very talented, very good, but they have not necessarily emerged to become what they thought Ross would be this year, which is their number one go-to guy. Ross gets an injury, so they're still searching for it a little bit at receiver. Amari Rodgers is great, but he's a little guy. I think once they get one of those big receivers up and running, that's when that's when Clemson is complete.
Right. And then you're just like, if we sort of limit Amari Rodgers and we limit Travis Etienne, that guy under center can still do some things. Yeah. They're not really asking Trevor to do a ton right now. We all know, obviously, he's not even really playing 4 quarters besides the Miami game. And then, they got the package that they showed against Miami where they bring in the backup whose name I don't want to butcher. And they bring in him and he adds an element to the offense as well because he can run and Trevor can run. But, at some point in time, someone has got to say, son, we got some millions to sort of keep, to insure you for here. And we got a national championship that we're trying to win. Stop taking these hits. We'll bring in DJ when it's that time.
Yeah, and we'll save the hits for the playoff like they did last year, and then he goes 70 yards for a touchdown, outrunning the Ohio State defense. Richard Johnson is from the SEC Network and many other places. RJ, I'm just going to let you do the whole spiel again. You can see him on Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern on the SEC Network, Thinking Out Loud with Spencer Hall and a bunch of other great folks who are far more talented than Spencer will ever be. But Spencer's good for comic relief.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
But tell me about all the other things and places we can read you and listen to you and find your stuff, RJ.
I'm Thinking Out Loud Mondays, 7 p.m. SEC Network. Moon Crew. Moon Crew's where I do some newsletter stuff. I also wrote a book with those guys. I do some writing at the Washington Post. Been doing a freelance series with them. Coming up, I'll be on Publication to be Named later. It's a quarterly magazine I'm doing with some ex-SB Nationers as well. That will drop end of this month, beginning of next month. I have a really good article that is a Q&A with a former college football player who did an act of protest and sort of how he lives with that decision and stuff like that. You can pick that up for just $1. Just Google Publication to be Named later. I do NFL takes, Yahoo Canada Sports. I do NFL picks, Odds Checker US. Do scheme stuff at Stadium with the homie Michael Felder. So I am all over the place this season. I'll sleep in January or February. I don't know when this season's going to end, but when it ends, that is when I will sleep. You and Felder are a good combination. And the book is Sinful 7, by the way. We can get that wherever, wherever you buy books online. Is that where the best way to? Yeah, yes. Sinful7.com. Sinful 7 Sci-Fi Western Legends of the NCAA. It is a history of college sports and then some is how I'll say it. And because it's a podcast, if you didn't get all that the first time, just hit the back button a couple of times and listen to it again, and you can get all RJ stuff. Richard, man, excellent to talk to you. Thank you so much for being on. We're going to make this hopefully happen a little more often. Took way too long for me to do it with you. Great stuff, and good luck on all the things you got going on. Absolutely. Thanks, Ralph. And now, 3 and out. First down. By the time you listen to this, there is a chance the NCAA's Division I Council will have approved 2 pretty important proposals, say that 3 times fast, with the potential to significantly reshape college sports. Both have been in the pipeline for a while. Let's go over them here. The council is expected to rubber stamp a name, image, and likeness proposal that will set some parameters for permitting athletes to make money off their fame. If you're wondering to yourself, hasn't that already happened? That's understandable. We have been talking about this for a while, and really not much substantially has changed. As soon as next year, the NCAA will permit college athletes to endorse products, be paid to be a social media influencer, or sign autographs at a memorabilia store. It won't be a completely open market, though. Under the proposal, athletes will not be permitted to use their school's logos or marks, which is the term that gets used in the industry, in any of their own paid promotions. Another important point, schools will not be paying the athletes. If athletes want to earn off their name, image, and likeness, they will have to strike up deals with outside sources. The athletes will be permitted to use agents to help them make these deals. They will also be permitted to enter into financial agreements with those deemed boosters of the schools they attend. That little bit sounds dicey, right? But there will be a third party or outside entity used as a sort of clearinghouse to ensure that any of the deals athletes make are within the market standard and do not fall into the category of inappropriate extra benefits. Now, if you're thinking, that still sounds a little dicey, yes. That part of this will potentially be quite tricky. Athletes will not be allowed to endorse products that run counter to the ideals of an institution or college sports in general. So what does that mean? Simply, no beer ads, no promoting tobacco products or marijuana where it's legal, and no promoting gambling. Lastly, athletes could be prohibited from endorsing products that directly conflict with their school's advertising partners. So, for example, Nike school might not permit an athlete to endorse Adidas. After the council is done with the proposal, it goes to a full NCAA membership vote in January.
if it passes, and it almost certainly will pass, it becomes NCAA law, so to speak. The last thing you need to know about all of this is no matter what the NCAA does, it's not the final word. The NCAA needs help from federal lawmakers to shield it from a bunch of states that are passing their own laws having to do with name, image, and likeness and college athletes. So no matter what the NCAA finally passes, and there still could be some tweaks to what it's dealing with between now and January, Congress will have the final say on name, image, and likeness rules. Got all that? Okay. Still with us? Because the next issue is a little more interesting and easier to sum up. Second down. The council is also expected to approve a proposal to allow athletes to transfer one time during their careers without having to sit out a season. No waivers necessary. A school does not have to grant permission. No blocking an athlete from going here or there. The one-time exception already exists in lots of college sports, just not in the most high-profile ones such as football and basketball. Now it will. Under the proposal, scholarship limits will not be expanded. So for football, for example, an overall cap of 85 scholarships and a yearly cap of 25 signees is still going to be in place. At least as of right now. That's what the proposal right now states. If your team really wants to dive into the transfer market, they can, but it will take away from its recruiting class. I know some folks and certainly some coaches will lament this move toward quote-unquote free agency, but the fact is, this is long overdue. If the NCAA insists athletes are just like regular students, then they need to be treated that way. It'll provide some agita for coaches, but they get paid quite well to deal with roster management. Like so many other things in college sports where doom and gloom has been predicted, the enterprise will survive both the transfer and NIL rule changes. Third down, and we'll finish it up on a football note. Among the first-year coaches off to a nice start is Jeff Hafley from BC. The Eagles are 3-1, having used some good fortune to win a couple of close games. Most notable, I think, about BC is how it's going about its business offensively. The Eagles and Notre Dame transfer Phil Jurkovec are throwing the ball all over the yard. BC is the worst rushing team in the ACC, but is averaging almost 300 yards per game passing. And it's not just a volume thing. BC's overall passer rating is excellent. The Eagles have only thrown 2 picks. Hafley is a former secondaries coach with NFL experience. He came most recently from Ohio State as the DC. He brought in veteran NFL assistant Frank Signetti to run the offense. And it looks like what Hafley has decided to do is run the stuff he has found hard to defend. That's the show for today. I'd like to thank my producer, Sarah McCrory, for making me sound good. You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Westwood One Podcast. Please subscribe so you do not miss an episode. I'm Ralph Russo, the college football writer with the Associated Press. Thanks for listening, and come back for more next week of the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast.